Part 1 of Section 6 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771, by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 6, January 1769, 1 January to 17 January. 1769, January 1. New Year's Day today made us pass many comptes and talk much of our hopes for success in the year 69. Many whales were about the ship today, and much seaweed in large lumps, but none near enough to be caught. In the evening, rather squally. The true sea-green colour upon the surface of the water was often to be seen now between the squalls, or rather, under the black clouds, when they were about half a mile from the ship. I had often heard of it before, but never seen it in any such perfection. Indeed, most of the seamen said the same. It was very bright, and perfectly like the stone called aquamarine. 1769, January 2. Fresh breezes today. In the evening, lat. about 45:30. Met with some small shoals of the red lobsters, which have been seen by almost everyone who has passed these seas. They were, however, so far from colouring the Red Sea, as Dampier and Cowley say, that I may affirm that we never saw more than a few hundreds of them at a time. We took, however, several in the casting and hove nets, and described them by the name of Cancer gregoris. 1769, January 3. Lat. 47:17. All hands looking out for Pepe's Island. About observing time an appearance was seen to the westward, so like an island, that we bear away after it, almost assured that it is land, as the midshipman at the masthead declared. For half an hour, which time he had steadily looked at it, it did not alter its appearance at all. However, about 4 we were convinced that we were in chase of Cape Flyaway, as the seamen call it. No sign of island or anything else appearing where it ought to have been. This evening many large bunches of seaweed came by the ship. We caught some of it with hooks. It was of an immense size, every leaf 4 feet long, and the stalk about 12. The footstalk of each leaf was swelled into a long air vessel. Mr. Gore tells me that he has seen this weed grow quite onto the top of the water in 12 fathom. If so, the swelled footstalks are probably the trumpet grass or weed of the Cape of Good Hope. We described it, however, as it appeared, and called it Fucus giganteus. Here were also this evening large quantities of a small bird, somewhat like Mother Carey's chickens, but rather larger and grey on the back, and plenty of albatrosses. Indeed, we have seen more or less of them every day for some time. 1769, January 4. Blew fresh today and night. The officer of the watch told me that in the night the sea was very much illuminated in patches of many yards wide, which appeared of a pale light colour. 1769, January 5. Fair wind. The sea very light at night, more so than ever I had seen it, so that the ship's course and every curl of a wave was of a light colour. But none of the light patches seen last night were now observed, which were chiefly remarkable, as the animals there must have shone without being agitated. In some of the water taken up, observed a small insect of a conical figure, very nimble, who moved himself with a kind of whorl of legs, or tentacula, round the base of the cone. We could not find any Nereides, or indeed any other insect than this in the water, but were not able to prove that he causes the light, so deferred our observations on him till the morning. 1769, January 6. Blew fresh, foul wind. Forced to throw away the insects taken last night from the ship having so much motion. The south-east wind now became very cold, to us at least, so lately come from the torrid zone. Therm at noon 48. All hands bend their Magellan jackets, made of a thick woolen stuff allowed them by the government, called fear-not, and myself put on a flannel jacket and waistcoat and thick trousers. In the evening blew strong. At night a hard gale. Ship brought to under a mainsail. During the course of this my bureau was overset, and most of the books were about the cabin floor, so that with the noise of the ship working, the books, etc., running about, and the strokes our cots or swinging beds gave against the top and sides of the cabin, we spent a very disagreeable night. We this morn expected to have made Falkland Islands, where we intended to put in for some time, so the missing of them, which we much fear, was a great disappointment to me, as I fear I shall now not have a single opportunity of observing the produce of this part of the world. 1769, January 7. Blew strong. Yet the ship still laying to, now for the first time saw some of the birds called penguins by the southern navigators. They seem much of the size and not unlike alcapica, but they are easily known by the streaks upon their faces and their remarkably shrill cry, different from any seabird I am acquainted with. We saw also several seals, but much smaller than those which I have seen in Newfoundland, and black. They generally appeared in lively action, leaping out of the water like porpoises, so much so that some of our people were deceived by them, mistaking them for fish. About noon, weather much more moderate. Set the lower sails. Before night, sea quite down, though the wind still stood at southeast. The sea rises and falls quicker in these latitudes than it does about England, which we have observed ever since we came into variable winds way to the south of the tropics. During this whole gale we observed a vast plenty of birds about us. Procellarias of all kinds we have before mentioned, the grey ones of the 3rd of this month, and a kind all black, perhaps Procellaria equinoctialis, Linn., but could not discern whether or not their beaks were yellow, and plenty of albatrosses. Indeed, I have generally observed a much greater quantity of birds upon wing in gales of wind than in moderate weather, owing perhaps to the tossing of the waves, which must render swimming very uneasy. In this situation they must be oftener seen than when they set on the water. The ship during this gale has shown her excellence in laying to remarkably well, shipping scarce any water, though it blew at times vastly strong. The seamen in general say that they never knew a ship lay to so well as this does, so lively, and at the same time so easy. 1769 January 8. Smooth water and fair wind. Many seals and penguins about the ship. The latter leaping out of the water and diving instantly, so that a person unused to them might easily be deceived and take them for fish. Plenty also of albatrosses and whales blowing very near the ship. We were now too sure that we had missed the Falkland Islands, and probably were to the westward of them. The ship has been observed to go much better since her shaking in the last gale of wind. The seamen say that it is a general observation that ships go better for being what they call loosened in their joints. So much so that in chase it is often customary to knock down stanchions, etc., and make the ship as loose as possible. 1769 January 9. Clouds to the westward appear so like land this morn that even our first lieutenant, who prided himself on his judgment in this particular, was deceived. Wind variable and calmer, many seals and some albatrosses, but none of those whitish birds which we saw in the gale of wind. 1769 January 10. Fine weather. Seals plentiful today, and a kind of birds different from any we have before seen. They were black, and a little larger than pigeons, plump like them, and easily known by their flapping their wings quick as they fly, contrary to the custom of seabirds in general. This evening a shoal of porpoises swam by the ship, different from any I have seen, spotted with large dabs of white and white under the belly, in other respects as swimming, etc., like common porpoises, only they leap rather more nimbly, sometimes lifting their whole bodies out of the water. 1769 January 11. Tierra del Fuego sighted. This morn at daybreak saw the land of Tierra del Fuego. By 8 o'clock we were well in with it, the weather exceedingly moderate. Its appearance was not near so barren as the writer of Lord Anson's Voyage has represented it. The weather exceedingly moderate, so we stood along shore about 2 leagues off. We could see trees distinctly through our glasses, and observed several smokes, made probably by the natives, as a signal to us. The captain now resolved to put in here if he can find a convenient harbour, and give us an opportunity of searching a country so entirely new. The hills within land seemed to be high, and on them were many patches of snow, but the sea-coast appeared fertile, especially the trees of a bright verdure, except in places exposed to southwest wind, which were distinguishable by their brown appearance. The shore itself sometimes beach and sometimes rock. At 4 in the evening wind came on shore, so stood off. 1769 January 12. This morn make the land again, soon after it had dropped calm, in which time we took Broe and Crissata, Medusa limpidissima, and Placata and Obligata, Alcyonium angulare, probably the thing that Chevlock mentions in his Voyage round the World, page 60, Alcyonium frustrum. After dinner a small breeze sprung up, and to our great joy we discovered an opening into the land, and stood in for it, in great hopes of finding a harbour. However, after having ran within a mile of the shore, were obliged to stand off again, as there was no appearance of shelter, and the wind was on shore. When we were nearest in, we could plainly discover with our glasses spots in which the colour of white and yellow were predominant, which we judged to be flowers. The white were in large clusters, almost everywhere, the yellow in small spots or patches, on the side of a hill covered with a beautiful verdure. The trees could now be distinguished very plainly, and seemed to be 30 or 40 feet high, with flat, bushy tops. The trunks in many places were bare, and resembled rocks a good deal, till the glasses cleared up the deception. Among the things taken today, observed Ulva intestinalis and Corallina officinalis. The wind very variable all day. At 9 this even the 3 brothers and Sugarloaf were in sight, and we stood gently along shore in hopes to be at the strait's mouth by the morning. About 6 this even the gentleman upon deck observed the Sugarloaf covered with a cloud for a short time, which left it entirely white. They judged it to have been a fall of snow upon the hill, but as I did not myself see it, I cannot give an opinion. 1769 January 13. This morn at daybreak we were at the strait's mouth, and stood in a little way, but the tide turning against us soon set us out again. At 8:30 again turned in our favour, but soon after wind came foul, so were forced to turn to windward. The wind soon freshening made us pitch most violently, so much that our jib netting was quite under water. At 12 today lat. 54:42. Staten Land is much more craggy than Terra del Fuego, though the view of it in Lord Anson's Voyage is exaggerated. About 4 it blew very hard, and the tide turning against us quickly drove us out of the straits the second time. At night less wind, though still southwest. Stood into the straits the 3rd time, and had another violent pitching bout. The tide turned against us before we were half through so in the morning. 1769 January 14. We found ourselves the 3rd time drove out, wind south-southwest, short sea, and ship pitching most violently. The captain stood into a bay just without Cape St. Vincent, and while the ship plied off and on, Dr. Solander and myself went ashore in the boat, and found many plants, about 100, though we were not ashore above 4 hours. Of these I may say every one was new, and entirely different from what either of us had before seen. The country about this bay was in general flat. Here is, however, good wood and water, and vast plenty of fowl, and in the cod of the bay a flat covered with grass, where much hay might be made. The bay itself is bad, affording but little shelter for shipping, and in many parts of it the bottom rocky and foul. This, however, may be always known in these countries by the beds of Fucus giganteus, which is constantly grown upon the rock, and are not seen on sand or ous. They are of an immense length. We sounded upon them, and had 14 fathom water. As they seem to make a very acute angle with the bottom in their situation on the water, it is difficult to guess how long they may be, but probably they are not less than 1/2 longer than the depth of the water, which gives their length to be 126 feet, a wonderful length for a stalk, not thicker than a man's thumb. Among other things the bay affords, there is plenty of winter spark, easy to be known by its broadleaf, like a laurel, of a light green colour and bluish underneath. The bark is easily stripped off with a bone or stick, as ours are barked in England. Its virtues are so well known that I shall say little, except that it may be used as a spice, even in culinary matters, and is found to be very wholesome. Here is also plenty of wild celery, Apium antiscorbuticum, scurvy grass, Cardamine antiscorbutica, both which are pleasant to the taste, as any herbs of the kind found in Europe, and I believe possess as much virtue in curing the scurvy. The trees here are chiefly of one sort, a kind of birch, Betula antarctica, with very small leaves. It is a light white wood, and cleaves very straight. Sometimes the trees are 3 or 4 feet in diameter, and run 30 or 40 feet in the bole. Possibly they might in cases of necessity supply topmasts. Here are also great plenty of cranberries, both red and white, Arbutus rigida. Inhabitants I saw none, but found their huts in 2 places, once in a thick wood and again close by the beach. They are most unartificially made, conical, but open on one side where was the marks of fire, so that probably the fire served them instead of a door. 1769 January 15. Stopped tide this morn in a bay on the Terra del Fuego side of the water, probably Prince Maurice's Bay, which served our purpose very well. At 10 tide turned, and we stood out, and by dinner came to an anchor in the Bay of Good Success. Several Indians were in sight near the shore. After dinner went ashore on the starboard side of the bay near some rocks which make smooth water and good landing. Before we had walked 100 yards many Indians made their appearance on the other side of the bay, at the end of a sandy beach which makes the bottom of the bay. But on seeing our numbers to be 10 or 12, they retreated. Dr. Solander and myself then walked forward 100 yards before the rest, and 2 of the Indians advanced also, and set themselves down about 50 yards from their companions. As soon as we came up, they rose, and each of them threw a stick he had in his hand, away from him and us, a token no doubt of peace. They then walked briskly toward the other party, and waved to us to follow, which we did, and were received with many uncouth signs of friendship. We distributed among them a number of beads and ribbons, which we had brought ashore for that purpose, at which they seemed mightily pleased. So much so, that when we embarked again aboard our boat, 3 of them came with us, and went aboard the ship. Of these, one seemed to be a priest or conjurer, or at least we thought him to be one by the noises he made, possibly exercising every part of the ship he came into, for when anything new caught his attention, he shouted as loud as he could for some minutes, without directing his speech either to us or to any one of his countrymen. They eat bread and beef, which we gave them, though not heartily, but carried the largest part away with them. They would not drink either wine or spirits, but returned the glass, though not before they had put it to their mouths and tasted a drop. We conducted them through the greatest part of the ship, and they looked at everything without any marks of extraordinary admiration, unless the noise which our conjurer did not fail to repeat at every new thing he saw might be reckoned as such. After having been aboard about 2 hours, they expressed a desire of going ashore, and a boat was ordered to carry them. I went with them and landed them among their countrymen, but I cannot say that I observed either the one party curious to ask questions, or the other to relate what they had seen, or what usage they had met with. So after having stayed ashore about half an hour, I returned to the ship, and the Indians immediately marched off from the shore. 1769, January 16. This morn very early, Dr. Solander and myself with our servants, and 2 seamen, to assist in carrying baggage, accompanied by Messrs. Monkhouse and Green, set out from the ship to try to penetrate into the country as far as we could, and if possible, gain the tops of the hills, where alone we saw places not overgrown with trees. We began to enter the woods at a small sandy beach a little to the westward of the watering place, and continued pressing through pathless thickets, always going uphill, till 3 o'clock before we gained even a near view of the places we intended to go to. The weather had all this time been vastly fine, much like a sunshiny day in May, so that neither heat nor cold was troublesome to us, nor were there any insects to molest us, which made me think the travelling much better than what I had before met with in Newfoundland. Soon after we saw the plains we arrived at them, but found to our great disappointment that what we took for a swathe was no better than low bushes of birch about reaching a man's middle. These were so stubborn that they could not be bent out of the way, but at every step the leg must be lifted over them, and on being placed again on the ground was almost sure to sink above the ankles in bog. No travelling could possibly be worse than this, which seemed to last about a mile, beyond which we expected to meet with bare rock, for such we had seen from the tops of the lower hills as we came. This I particularly was infinitely eager to arrive at, expecting there to find the alpine plants of a country so curious. Our people, though rather fatigued, were yet in good spirits, so we pushed on, intending to rest ourselves as soon as we could arrive at plain ground. We proceeded 2/3 of the way without the least difficulty, and I confess I thought for my own part that all difficulties were surmounted when Mr. Buchan fell into a fit. A fire was immediately lit for him, and with him all those who were most tired remained behind, while Dr. Solander, Mr. Green, Mr. Monkhouse, and myself advanced for the Alp, which we reached almost immediately, and found, according to expectation, plants which answered to those we had found before as alpine ones in Europe, due to those which we find in the plains. The air was here very cold, and we had frequent snow blasts. I had now entirely given over all thoughts of reaching the ship that night, and thought of nothing but getting into the thick of the wood and making a fire, which, as our road lay all downhill, seemed very easy to accomplish. So Messrs. Green and Monkhouse returned to the people, and appointed a hill for a general rendezvous, from whence we should proceed, and build our wigwam. The cold now increased apace. It might be near 8 o'clock, though yet exceedingly good daylight, so we proceeded for the nearest valley, where the short birch, the only thing we now dreaded, could not be a half a mile over. Our people seemed well, though cold, and Mr. Buchan was stronger than we could have expected. I undertook to bring up the rear and see that no one was left behind. We passed about halfway very well, when the cold seemed to have at once an effect infinitely beyond what I ever experienced. Dr. Solander was the first who felt it. He said he could not go any farther but must lay down, though the ground was covered with snow, and down he laid, notwithstanding all I could say to the contrary. Richmond, a black servant, now began also to lag, and was much in the same way as the doctor. At this juncture I dispatched 5 forwards, of whom Mr. Buchan was one, to make ready a fire at the very first convenient place they could find, while myself with 4 more stayed behind to persuade, if possible, the doctor and Richmond to come on. With much persuasion and entreaty we got through much the largest part of the birch, when they both gave out. Richmond said that he could not go any farther, and when told that if he did not he must be froze to death, only answered that there he would lay and die. The doctor, on the contrary, said that he must sleep a little before he could go on, and actually did a full quarter of an hour, at which time we had the welcome news of a fire being lit about a quarter of a mile ahead. I then undertook to make the doctor proceed to it, finding it impossible to make Richmond stir, left 2 hands with him, who seemed the least affected with cold, promising to send 2 to relieve them as soon as I should reach the fire. With much difficulty I got the doctor to it, and as soon as 2 people were sufficiently warmed, sent them out in hopes that they would bring Richmond and the rest. After staying about half an hour, they returned bringing word that they had been all round the place shouting and hallooing, but could not get any answer. We now guessed the cause of the mischief. A bottle of rum, the whole of our stock, was missing, and we soon concluded that it was in one of their knapsacks, and that the 2 who were left in health had drank immoderately of it, and had slept like the other. For 2 hours now it had snowed almost incessantly, so we had little hopes of seeing any of the 3 alive. About 12, however, to our great joy, we heard a shouting, on which myself and 4 more went out immediately, and found it to be the seaman, who had waked almost starved to death, and come a little way from where he lay. Him I sent back to the fire, and proceeded by his direction to find the other 2. Richmond was upon his legs, but not able to walk. The other lay on the ground as insensible as a stone. We immediately called all hands from the fire, and attempted by all the means we could contrive to bring them down, but finding it absolutely impossible. The road was so bad and the night so dark that we could scarcely ourselves get on, nor did we without many falls. We would then have lit a fire upon the spot, but the snow on the ground, as well as that which continually fell, rendered that as impracticable as the other, and to bring fire from the other place was also impossible, from the quantity of snow which fell every moment from the branches of the trees. So we were forced to content ourselves with laying out our unfortunate companions upon a bed of boughs, and covering them over with boughs, also as thick as we were able, and thus we left them hopeless of ever seeing them again alive, which indeed we never did. In these employments we had spent an hour and a half, exposed to the most penetrating cold I ever felt, as well as continual snow. Peter Briscoe, another servant of mine, began now to complain, and before we came to the fire became very ill, but got there at last, almost dead with cold. Now might our situation truly be called terrible. Of 12, our original number 2 were already past all hopes. 1 more was so ill that though he was with us, I had little hopes of his being able to walk in the morning, and another very likely to relapse into his fits, either before we set out, or in the course of our journey. We were distant from the ship. We did not know how far. We knew only that we had been the greatest part of a day in walking through pathless woods. Provision we had none but 1 vulture, which had been shot while we were out, and at the shortest allowance could not furnish half a meal. And to complete our misfortunes, we were caught in a snowstorm, in a climate we were utterly unacquainted with, but which we had reason to believe was as inhospitable as any in the world, not only from all the accounts we have heard or read, but from the quantity of snow which we saw falling, though it was very little after midsummer, a circumstance unheard of in Europe, for even in Norway or Lapland, snow is never known to fall in the summer. 1769, January 17. The morning now dawned and showed us the earth covered with snow, as well as all the tops of the trees. Nor were the snow squalls at all less frequent, for seldom many minutes were fair together. We had no hopes now but of staying here as long as the snow lasted, and how long that would be God alone knew. About 6 o'clock the sun came out a little, and we immediately thought of sending to see whether the poor wretches we had been so anxious about last night were yet alive. 3 of our people went, but soon returned with the melancholy news of their being both dead. The snow continued to fall, though not quite so thick as it had done. About 8, a small breeze of wind sprung up, and with the additional power of the sun began, to our great joy, to clear the air, and soon after we saw the snow begin to fall from the tops of the trees, a sure sign of an approaching thaw. Peter continued very ill, but said he thought himself able to walk. Mr. Buchan, thank God, was much better than I could have expected, so we agreed to dress our vulture and prepare ourselves to set out for the ship as soon as the snow should be a little more gone off. So he was skinned and cut into 10 equal shares, every man cooking his own share, which furnished about 3 mouthfuls of hot meat, all the refreshment we had had since our cold dinner yesterday, and all we were to expect till we should come to the ship. About 10 we set out, and after a march of about 3 hours, arrived at the beach, fortunate in having met with much better roads in our return than we did in going out, as well as in being nearer to the ship than we had any reason to hope. For on reviewing our track, as well as we could from the ship, we found that we had made a half circle round the hills, instead of penetrating, as we thought we had done, into the inner part of the country. With what pleasure, then, did we congratulate each other on our safety. No one can tell who has not been in such circumstances. End of Part 1 of Section 6, January 1 to January 17, 1769.